This is the after party. Your hosts are the Great Order and No White Guilt. Folks, some true heroes are taking the time to make clips of the work we are doing and thereby magnifying by orders of magnitude all of that work. Some of these, as well as many others, are making content using the Going Free lexicon and dialectics, the only lexicon and dialectics outside of the anti-white narrative, and therefore the only ones that will work. You should play a part in that process. Find, follow, and spread the work that these folks are doing. You will learn more about Going Free, and you will spread this curative contagion to others. HB 2014, Raymond Foster, Budapest Babe, Promethean Promulgation, and many others are making fantastic content. Please find them, follow them, spread the work that they are doing, and you will be doing your part to recapture our destiny. As for the crown winner of last week, the crown goes to Western Pride Worldwide for gifting a total of 50 Prometheus Rising pounds. Congratulations and thank you, my dear friend. In second place was a name I just mentioned, doing double duty, Promethean Promulgation, gifting $25. Congratulations and thank you as well. As you all know, you can financially gift on Entropy at 15%, where you can also watch the stream and ask and vote on questions. You can also financially gift on Cash App. If you are new to TAP, Jared and I evenly share the financial gifts with our guests here on the After Party. Today, we have Endeavour on tap. Welcome, brother. Please introduce yourself to our advanced placement community and tell them where they can find you and your work, and then Mr. George will take us into the conversation.
Well, I first want to say thank you, Jason and Jared, for the invitation. I'm a longtime listener and first time I've appeared on your show, but I think it's something I've been looking forward to for a long time. I'd say that my channel, I generally focus on metapolitics, culture, history from a right-wing reactionary perspective, and pretty much everything as it attains to the white positive sphere of politics, whatever you want to call it, the dissident right, the alt-right as they used to call it, or generally the pro-white sphere of politics. I make videos about that, and I cover topics from things like political thought, the Enlightenment. I've talked about quite a lot on my channel. I discuss certain films on our culture as it's shown in film or in literature, and maybe I'll even do some videos on my own personal experience or stories from my own life, and how they influence my views on the modern world. And hopefully, I guess I try to come to some insight into how, our people can conquer modernity and this kind of malaise that our civilization is in now. That's what I generally do with my channel.
Well, we're all about that. And Endeavour, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to speak with you as well. We appreciate your comments at the beginning. So everyone out there listening, whether you're live right now and we're going to have a great show, or you're listening in the future, Endeavour's work is really big picture. And we like that here. Jason and I like thinking in systems, making sure we don't miss the forest for the trees. Of course, you always have to oscillate between the big picture and details to back up the big picture. But we certainly don't want to get lost in the details. We want to see how all of these different things connect. And Endeavour's really done a great service in what he presents on his channel through his work. I've had a good pleasure in getting deeper into it in preparing for this show. So we're going to kind of start right in the middle with a specific question with something from your video series on the Enlightenment, Endeavour. And then for everyone listening, we're going to start with just a particular topic, but from there, it will blossom out into a bigger picture. So I know sometimes we often will start this show, especially with someone's first time, with kind of this general funnel and get more specific in our ideas. But there's so much to get to with Endeavour. Of course, we want to best serve his work. So I think this is the best way to do it. Maybe I'm wrong, but we'll have to see. So Endeavour, I wanted to start with a question about one of your pieces from the Enlightenment series. And then, as I said, we can kind of use that as a springboard to get to some other topics. So that would be, you talk about how there was this idea of moral progress, the perfectibility of man. I think most of us are familiar with that kind of thing. And the anti-white ideology that is currently referred to as progressivism, how it kind of has this root in this idea of moral progress. And you could kind of educate man into his best nature or something like that. Now, I want to delve into that a little bit more to make sure that the argument is a little airtight against attacks. But just to set the table, why don't you just give us a little bit of an overview of what you had said about this idea of moral progress and how it differs from other views of man and worldview in this video series of yours?
Yeah, so this was the first video I made in the series, and what I do with the series is I'll take on a different concept that it comes from the Enlightenment and how it applies to modern political discourse. Now, I don't assign all the blame to this intellectual movement. I think that a lot, the situation we're in, a lot of it is influenced by modern technology and kind of modern decadency in Western society. And I think a lot of it is also due to bad actors and subversion and a hostile elite. But with the Enlightenment series, I think that the problem with it is that it gives us this political dialectic that really traps us in this anti-white paradigm. And what I talked about in the first video was the idea of enlightenment itself. So the idea that humanity can make this moral progress beyond its very violent and brutal nature that is really governed human society for all its history, as anyone who has read history will know. You know, it's not a it's not a Care Bears episode. But you see, the problem with the idea that we can morally progress is that we have this idea in our head that that the violence from our past and the all these wars and things that happened in the past, we assign that to to being not as morally advanced, that we haven't that stuff happened because we were unenlightened, we were controlled by old superstitions, or that they maybe 10 years ago they would have said it was religion that was causing it. Now they're saying it's whiteness and white privilege or something like that, but that we've morally advanced beyond that. I think that that's a very destructive idea for two reasons. One is that it assigns guilt to past actions, and which I think that the reason that in the past that people had to go to war more often, people had to fight other tribes a lot more often, is because frankly, it was a lot more hard for them to survive. So, of the Vikings in, Scandinavia back then, if they had to go pillage another tribe and steal their belongings to feed their family, it was not because they, just hadn't read John Locke's book. It wasn't because, they just had these wacky religious superstitions or something like a liberal-minded person would claim today. It's because survival for them was much more difficult. And the game of civilization is not an egalitarian one, and people will do what it takes to survive, and that really requires you to be dominant. And I think that the West was just the best at that. And secondly, it also blinds us to the idea that we could ever face a struggle like that again. So, and like a modern example of that is you can see all these riots, this violence going on in our streets over the last 2-3 months. And you can see people in the Black Lives Matter movement calling for our blood. And, I've tried to wake up some of my liberal-minded family members to this, but they just have this idea that like they can't conceptualize that ever happening because they have it in their mind that, you know, we've just progressed beyond that. They just have so much faith in the liberal ideas that our society is founded on that something like that could never happen. And it really just blinds you. It really lets down your defense to the reality of the nature of man.
Right. I remember that you make a point in the series when you're speaking about this, that what we're enjoying now, as much as you hear critiques of the modern world in our circles, obviously it's the world that we know, and we can't be so monolithic about it. There are things that you could say are better, or at least you'd have to give a lot of thought to if you'd really, really want to go get back in a time machine and go back to certain eras. But you pin that more at the feet of technological advances and advancements in access to resources. Is that right?
Yes. So, for example, I don't want to give anyone the idea that I think modern medicine is a bad thing. Of course, you know, if we can cure all these diseases that would have killed people when they were young 100, 200 years ago, of course, that's a good thing. And, you know, I don't think that things like running water are bad at all. But what I think, though, is you don't necessarily need liberal politics to have good technology. You know, and then it's also very convenient for a lot of people today, namely someone like Steven Pinker, who will claim that, you know, we're just progressing towards this amazing future, just everything's getting better. And it's very convenient for someone to say that when, you know, that ideology was in place while the technology was advancing. But, you know, you don't need liberalism to have good technology. And there's plenty of examples of that, and a lot more emerging in the last couple of decades of illiberal societies that are well off materially, technologically, and are relatively safe. So there's this conflation that has happened, that we conflate Enlightenment liberalism with safety and prosperity and peace, when that really isn't the case. And I think that it today is actually creating problems. It is creating a future conflict. So I think that it's important to just make that separation, that, you know, the technology, there's just no way to go back. I'm not a Luddite by any stretch. And I will criticize, you know, a lot of the maybe the negative effects of that, but of technological advancement. But we do have to deal with that. But, you know, you don't need multiculturalism to find the cure to cancer.
Right. Yeah, you've already begun to address where I wanted to go with this. And it's simply that, if I was understanding correctly, that you're trying to correct this assumption that the Enlightenment put forth, that we have this moral perfection of man that is this grand project. And you say that all of these things, and of course, we're going to get more into the nuances of this. I agree with you with the whole Pinker thing. We don't want to be too materialist about it, at the risk of losing the other parts of what makes us us, and break everything down to charts and graphs, where I don't think any of us here are really about that. Mm-hmm. But even if you wanted to look at it more statistically, like there's less deaths, and now you have refrigerators and all this kind of thing that he lists in books of his, like Enlightenment Now, where this is supposed to represent this march towards utopia. So you're trying to decouple that from the moral progress thing, very intertwined, of course, with the founding of America as well, and some of the religious groups that had come here. But what I want to make sure, while we're on the topic, and for the good of people listening, as I understand this a little bit more myself, what you're saying is, if we're still kind of giving a nod to the march of technology, and hand in hand with that, I'm sure that anyone arguing the progressive line would be coupling that with education. And then we're a hop, skip, and a jump away from, again, this idea that, well, people can just be educated into being better, more enlightened citizens. Let's just make sure, while we're talking about this, that we don't leave kind of these trap doors open to the progressives justifying their position with this. Well, it's like sounds like you're just saying in another way that education and technology all help make things better. So you're arguing for our line, man. So where do you draw the important distinctions there and kind of tease that out?
Well, I'd say that it depends on how they define things as getting better, because, you know, I'll give it to them that, you know, modern medicine is a good thing, but, you know, there's all these other positives that we're losing, and, you know, many of the things that make people's lives actually worthwhile, things like identity, culture, religion, spirituality, having some societal purpose, we're losing all of that at the same time. So, you know, even if you can have a new iPhone, that doesn't necessarily make your life more fulfilling. So I think that's the first point, is that, you know, it's not necessarily, you know, certain aspects might be better, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not losing out on things that perhaps are even more important. But secondly, the other problem is with the argument on education, is that, much like the broader argument of moral advancement, it's that it puts too much faith into human institution. It's that, you know, we can just overgo the nature of man just by educating people. And, you know, I think that a stable and healthy order would always take into account that you know, man is a very violent creature, and that we need to structure the institutions around him to deal with that nature. We can't fundamentally change it. So, you know, and then not only that, but the other thing is, what you'll notice with a lot of these Enlightenment types is that they actually will forego their own values. So they will forego things such as HBD, because that just doesn't line up with their vision for the world. So they'll claim the mantle of science and reason and enlightenment. But then what you'll see with them is that as soon as that goes against the kind of egalitarian vision that they have in their mind, they'll reject the science. They'll deny the science the second that it's no longer convenient for them. So even then, I'd say that they're not even really living up to that entire argument that through like education and reason and the scientific method, we can advance, because they're you know, as it comes to gender, and even more so as it comes to race, as I'm sure everyone who watches the show understands, there is just massive denial of very concrete evidence and very convincing evidence as to the reality that race actually plays. And all of these problems are being created based on that denial. So, you know, we can point to, like, you know, the advancement in technology, but then there is there's these several huge just anti-scientific assumptions that the order we are living under has, which are very detrimental to I think the well-being of the entire society, but even like just that materialistic technological one that Enlightenment types will proclaim.
I want to, if I could just really quickly, I know Mr. George is ready to jump right back in there, but thank you so much for your answers so far, Endeavour. I just want to point out, and this is an excellent opportunity from what you're talking about here, that with Going Free, we have such a beautiful lens for understanding what is going on, in that this is perfectly execrable by what we see in society, in that those who claim to be these liberalists, or claim to have liberal values, or who claim to be direct descendants in their views of the Enlightenment and etc. These ideas in and of themselves, they may have, and they do, of course, have many different errors within them, or failings, or, you know, miscalculations about human nature and etc., things of this nature. But nonetheless, there is something that moves behind this and other different schools of thought that animates them. A demonic spirit, if you will, a monster that puts these things on like a mask and moves from one thing to the next. And if you attempt to just merely look at somebody who considers themselves a liberalist, or a part of the liberal tradition, or what have you, and you see then that well, they claim they claim to own science, which is of course preposterous. But they claim to own science, and then they will reject science in all of these other cases, these specific cases, for example, when it comes to HBD and etc. Well, what's happening here is not a creature of the Enlightenment that has moved forward and is now speaking with these errors, these blind spots, these blinkers on, blinders on. But instead, what you see is the anti-white monster, the anti-white demon, possessing yet again another collection of ideas, and in all ways adopting those portions of those ideas that will serve anti-white interests, and rejecting all portions of those ideas that undermine anti-white interests. So we see that with these demons that I guess I don't know, infect whatever the demon, what is it called when the demon gets inside, that possesses these ideas. We see that is where the true power is, that these ideas, schools of thought, etc., there are many, we see that they have very little power, they have no movement, they have no energy until they are animated by this demonic spirit. And then suddenly, this is what's foisted on the populations. And of course, we see the incongruity of the ideology and its application, because the demon that is animating it never was a true or genuine believer of the ideologies that it adopts. It's sort of what I talked about in Crucible, that there's a mask that they put up for us, and they say, this is what you are supposed to celebrate, this is what you are supposed to worship, this is your new religion for the West. And then there are massive inconsistencies. And of course, the conservatives and the like, they see the inconsistencies and they say, why, these people are hypocrites. And we see indeed that you can make a tweet on Twitter, and so many people are infected with the shallow level of thinking that you can say in tweet after tweet, well, they get to do this, we don't get to do it. And hundreds of thousands of views, or with tens of thousands of views and retweets, and everybody saying, yeah, what hypocrites they are. Seeing the hypocrisy is the first level of coming to going free. The next level is realizing that there is no hypocrisy. If Enlightenment ideas weren't the best-selling ideas to the populations of the West right now, this anti-white demon would possess the ideas that would possess the next collection of thoughts, or body of thought, or school of thought that would be the best-selling school of thought to the masses in the West right now. And then, of course, you would see, again, inconsistencies in the application of that body of thought, because wherever the body of thought undermines the ability of an anti-white to inflict harm on Western kind and Western civilization, those demons will act, think, write, speak inconsistently. So for them, there isn't an objective that is found, an objective reality or an objective truth that is found in the body of the thought that they are advancing. The objective reality is what they attempt to hide from us, but we have identified, which is the objective of inflicting harm on Western kind and Western civilization. And I'll just pass it back. We'll get Endeavor's thoughts on this, and Mr. George, and we'll move on. This idea is something that you can take in all of the directions, all of the sort of tangential ways. This understanding you can take in all of the tangential ways. If the demon, the anti-white demon, can possess a school of thought, just as we see in mysticism, human beings being possessed, or in religion, human beings being possessed by devils. If they can do that, the demon can also lay claim to anything that is either real or artificial in its relation with the body of thought. So if they can claim that there is this ownership or collection or of successes by way of the scientific method because of the school of thought, in question, then they will claim ownership to that, when not only is there not ownership there, but they don't own the original body of thought in the first place. And we will see in this lifetime that we are in before we are gone, we will see the anti-whites shift away increasingly from this idea of liberalism and the liberal tradition, liberal democracy. In fact, we're seeing that shift now, and they will don a new mask, and you will see suddenly, as though, you know, a inflatable Santa in front of your house loses its air and deflates. You will see all of this, the body of thought suddenly deflate. The money will disappear, the energy will disappear, the classrooms where they are studying, teaching, and talking about all of this, all of that will disappear, and the anti-whites will then be investing in a brand new body of thought that they believe will be able to sell better to the masses that are in front of them. And a great example of it right now is you see across the West, and now poignantly in cities like Minneapolis and states like California, where in California they're now moving to repeal the law that prohibits open discrimination against a particular race, because they have been discriminating against Western kind for a great many years now, but they've had to give excuses for doing so. And now that they know that times are changing for them in California, and it'll be more efficient and more of a boon to the anti-whites who are in office to go to the masses who are now increasingly anti-white and increasingly rabid and say to them, we are going to openly discriminate against the white race. We are going to make it the law of the land so that we can be fair. It's always going to come to some excuse like that. So I just wanted to mention that the body of thought, you can dissect a body of thought and you can go through it, or school of thought, and you can go through it and find where it seems to comport with reality, our understanding, and now certainly since its inception, we have a much better understanding of the human nature, of human dynamics, of group dynamics, and we can see, okay, well, it's right here, it's wrong there, but we shouldn't fall into the trap of believing that if we defeat an anti-white in argument about a position in, say, the liberalist tradition, that we have somehow defeated the demon that possesses that body of thought or that school of thought right now. And the final thing is one admonition: don't to just all of us here, don't fall for the it's not necessarily a trick, but when an anti-white who claims to represent a body of thought demonizes something, for example, like hate, where they have, this word has been made into an anti-white slur, we should never use it. I just was recent, I guess it was on Instagram, where we said anger is a virtue when it protects the innocent. That is one of our meme curatives. We should never use this word hate. But what we shouldn't do is fall into the trap, what I wanted to say here, we shouldn't fall into the trap that because the anti-whites condemn this word, shouldn't fall into the trap of attempting to legitimize hate, attempting to explain why hate is good, or hate is natural, or hate is moral, or hate is, all of that is an incorrect step in dealing with the anti-whites. And in fact, though an individual anti-white might not be planning that as a trap for you, it ultimately works as a trap, because you have stepped into the guise of appearing as this objectionable person to all sensible, ordinary white people with normal sensibilities around the world. So let's get your thought on that, Endeavour, anything that I just said whatsoever, and then we'll have Mr. George, his thoughts, and continue with the conversation.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought that up, Jason, because you are right that I think that we are only nominally living in a supposed liberal democracy, but you are right that what underlies all that is anti-whiteism, as we call it. So the powers that be will abandon liberal ideas as soon as they're no longer convenient. And I think that the problem with them is that the ideas are correct, like right-wing thought and the thought from a lot of people, unfortunately, that are on our side of politics are still thinking along this lines. Like, I'll take an example of someone like Sargon of Akkad. He's probably made like 100 videos in his time pointing out the hypocrisy of the anti-white people who are getting people banned from social media. He'll say, well, what about free speech? Isn't this a liberal country? Don't we have free speech and law? Or, they'll point out that, well, isn't affirmative action discrimination? I thought there was laws against discrimination. But then what you'll see is that in the current dialectic we're in, that will all those will be thrown out the window when they're no longer convenient for the anti-white agenda. And like an example of this is I did a video on the concept of human rights because this is an Enlightenment concept. It's evolved out of the concept of natural rights, that people have the natural right to life, liberty, and property. And I said that what I said in the video is that they just basically don't exist. You only really have rights that are granted to you by the power structure that you live under. So the one that we live under today, they will proclaim the liberal concept of human rights. But the problem is this: it's being interpreted by the modern legal system, by bodies like the UN, all of these courts, and all these institutions are anti-white. So human rights as they exist today are an anti-white concept. So what I said in the video is that according to someone like the UN or something like that, non-white people having their own country, that's a human right. But then white people having borders on their country, which keep non-white people out of the country, well, that's a human rights violation. If a white person has in-group preference, well, that's a human rights violation. But a non-white person doing the same is not a human rights violation. Censoring somebody who has pro-white opinions, well, that's in favor of human rights, because hate speech is against human rights. But anti-white having freedom of speech, well, that's their human right, because they need the right to say that. So what you'll see is they'll always draw the boundaries. That's basically how that's the tool that they use to always draw the boundaries. So they will abandon liberalism when it's convenient for them. What I hope to do, though, is I hope to break our people out of this dialectic, and because it's one that it ensures our own self-negation. So if we believe in this, if we give legitimacy to the modern concept of human rights, we can never defend ourselves, because the modern concept is interpreted by people who are anti-white. If we give into the modern concept of the consent of the governed, it really kind of clouds our vision to who's actually ruling over us, because it gives us this illusion that we're in control of our own destiny because we have a democracy and we can vote for the president, and we have elected representatives. But in reality, we're actually governed by a body that is that is, first of all, hostile to us, but also not in any way, shape, or form democratic or elected, and it's not run by our own consent.
Yeah, I'm glad that you started to say that, and then Jason followed up, because of course, yeah, we want to understand everything is couched in this anti-white agenda that people have. And I initially proposed the question, and it's something that'll run throughout the theme of today's show, in that even if it's used that way now, for us to learn and for us to have a better understanding of who we are, where we come from, and what our blind spots are. I mean, God knows we need a self-esteem boost for many of our people today. But we also, concurrent with that, of course, need some self-awareness. And anyone needs to know their blind spots. And it is, after all, European peoples who, by and large, came up with these ideas. Funny enough that they're now being used against us. They're being invoked to be used against us. But to begin with, I was asking you about how we can make sure that there weren't these trapdoors open, so that we're still giving the progressive person in front of us this in where they could attack us and say, oh, wait, no, you're speaking well of technology and you're speaking well of education. That's what we're all about. But the thing to remember, of course, is that nothing is value neutral. that speaks to exactly what the both of you were just saying. And Endeavour, you underlined that perfectly when you pointed out, very important, and this is how we can now twist it on them with this imagined interlocutor, would be, well, okay, you believe in science. Funny enough, friend, I have a few statistics to share with you. Or I know a guy who lost his Nobel Prize over some of this. So, to your point, we can certainly call them out on the fact that if they like science so much, well, if that's the leg they're going to stand on, we can have plenty of counter arguments. But a couple things here. First of all, I just want to ask, because again, this is a huge topic, and there's so many different paths we can take with this, but just to keep it focused, this whole idea that you can have a person who is intelligent enough to be able to understand and repeat some of these points, but they don't have the intelligence / and or character to really follow things where they take them, and really try to see things with as much purity and clarity as one can. I know that you speak about the social breakdown, and I'm curious as to how you might connect it to that, where I've spoken at times, we've spoken on this show about how a lot of the Enlightenment was concurrent with mercantilism, and look, everyone's always been buying, selling, trading since time immemorial, right? Since human beings gathered in first assemblages of tribes and family clans. But the mercantilism that developed in Europe around the time of the Enlightenment slowly saw a new value system and a new kind of man or a new class reach an ascendancy and a level of power now that they had not prior to that. So I was usually thinking of it in terms of, like, you hear about social orders being disrupted. Some people kind of use this Kali Yuga phrase of things being inverted, however you want to say it. I recently watched the Edward Dutton video recently that a lot of people are talking about regarding the midwit. So he was talking more about intelligence, but the same thing pretty much holds true in that we're overeducating people now, and more master's degrees and PhDs are being given out. So it kind of confers this air of authority on people who a few decades ago, sure, they'd be a little above average intelligence, but they wouldn't be the people who are forming opinions and running things and running amok the way that they are now. So all that to say that rise of the middle, whether it be the mercantile kind of instinct or whether it be a above average kind of intelligence, but still not what you'd want to kind of be an elite, how it speaks to a breakdown of order. I know that you are all about more traditional orders. So I'm curious as to how that kind of factors into your worldview and thinking how to get things back on track.
Well, what I would say is that one thing that is vital to order is loyalty amongst those who are in power. And I talk about power a lot on my channel too. I think that you can't have a free society. You cannot have liberty unless you have power on your side. And I think that the problem of maybe that like mercantile middle bourgeoisie class gaining the same that amount of power historically, maybe I think that in a healthy society, the elites, because I think there always will be elites. I believe in hierarchy. I think that every society is going to be ruled by a small number of people. I think that we are under even despite all the despite how ideologically egalitarian the West is today, it is ruled by an elite. It is very hierarchical. The problem is that elite is anti-white. I think that there is value in the elites having status, not only money, not only power, but having some kind of status that ties them to the civilization that they govern. So historically, this could have been something like a monarchy. They have not only do they have power over their own domain, not only do they have a lot of wealth, but they also have status tied up in it. So a ruler, a monarch, would he would have a vested interest in maintaining a stable and successful society into the future, because he's handing that down to his son, and that's his posterity. That is his name, as it will be remembered in the history books. And he has a lot more, as the phrase goes, skin in the game. I feel that having status for the elites, they have pride in the society that they're governing, and it's long-term health and success beyond their own lifetime gives them some kind of status. I think that is a good motivator to actually have a competent and loyal elite group of elites. So I'd say that might be that's one of the problems with the shift away from a royal kind of elites to a more mercantile business kind of elites, because I do believe that, and I will say this, that it's important to point out that the Enlightenment is out of the European mind, but Antiwhiteism, in my opinion, is not of our people. It is not out of the European mind, in my opinion. But the factor remains that I think our countries were subverted over the last 75 years by this ideology, but there were people in power who had to give it up. Why didn't they push back when in past eras, if someone had tried to do the same thing, they would have faced all this resistance? And I think a large portion of that is that they did not have that same status and that same connection, and really the amount of skin in the game as rulers in past eras would have had.
Right, because it would seem that the bourgeoisie kind of thing that we're talking about is a much more temporary, much more superficial kind of status. I mean, I agree about true status and hierarchy being important, but a lot of that is in those circles, it's a posturing. The middle class is famous for trying to ape the upper classes and act like they have more than they have, or they know more than they know. And there's all kind of that social climbing anxiety, and it can wreak havoc, as a lot of people are seeing now. It's kind of these pseudo-intellectual hipster types, I guess, are a modern or a contemporary version of that. But any other thoughts about? I mean, I know it's all connected, so that's why I keep saying it's this is such a beast of a conversation, because it's hard. You mentioned one thing, but you understand how it's connected to 10 other things. But how that broke down?
Yeah, it's something I've been trying to understand for the last 3-4 years, and it's not an easy question to come to. I think there's definitely the aspect of subversion, but then, like I mentioned, the burning question is, why was that allowed to happen? And I guess it's something spiritual within us, that we just didn't have that same civilizational confidence in ourselves to prevent such a thing from happening. Because I know that you mentioned you had seen the stream I did with Horace. The example I used was that in the Middle Ages, a Templar, he was absolutely convinced that he was on the side of good, that he was on a mission from God, and that to give in to something like that would be to condemn himself to an eternal evil, and that person is much more driven to maintain his civilization and than somebody who is just purely driven by the material. And I think that a lot of the reason that we just haven't had that same pushback that you would have seen in past eras is losing things like religion, losing things like national ethnic pride. And I do wonder, like, a lot of that does have to do with kind of just the decadency and technology of our time. But it's definitely not an easy question to answer, because we all know that a lot of subversion has gone on over the last century or so of Western society. But the burning question is, why was that allowed to happen? And that one's not easy to answer.
A lot of people associate the term I'm about to use with science itself, which is actually not the case, because it's a specific ideology and even a religion. It was a proto-religion of a lot of what we're talking about now. But where do you put Darwinism into this, and how Darwinism it grew to this? It kind of was what you talk about today, where it's like the religion, you can't question the civic religion. I didn't realize until recently, when I was hearing a little more about it, how quickly it went from this theory, and even Darwin himself wasn't sure of certain things, to within 10 or 20 years, like every scientist and professor at prestigious universities had to pay lip service to Darwinism when it came to the fore, and it kind of exploded in the mid 1800s. So anything on that?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not a scientist, so I don't know how much I can actually comment on his ideas in particular.
Well, more the effect of the ideology.
Well, I don't actually think, though, that in my opinion, I don't know how much science has actually made people less religious and less spiritual. I think it's more just kind of having all this. Well, I guess maybe it is in that sense science. It could be just having all this technology to kind of distract you. Like, I don't think that I don't know if I really believe that, people learning more about the world necessarily means that they can't also have a spiritual life. Many of the great scientists of all time really have been very religious men, like Copernicus, Isaac Newton. Darwin himself, I believe he was religious, but lost his faith, not due to his scientific discoveries, but because I believe his daughter died, if I'm not mistaken. Someone might have to correct me on that. So I don't think that necessarily science has to replace a more spiritual life. But also, I will say about Darwinism is it certainly does not suggest in any way, shape, or form an egalitarian progressive worldview. Like we mentioned before, these types will claim things like Darwinism, but then the second that it can be able to suggest something that's pro-white instead of anti-white, they'll throw it out the window. So,
Oh, sure.
I don't know if that's not a very complete answer, but I guess
no. It's just a big thing to consider, and I certainly agree with you about the learning more about the world is certainly not anti-religion and anti-spirituality. Yeah, they do make strange bedfellows, the progressive, quote unquote, progressive march forward, and Darwinism. Darwinism was used initially. I mean, I was asking the question. Now that I'm thinking more about it, it was used to justify the British Empire, and there was something that would definitely be called, quote unquote, supremacist today. But increasingly, from the little I know of it, it was used more and more by these so-called elites to justify this technocratic push forward and justify their own conception of themselves. And as we got into the early 1900s, there was more of a conscious effort to control universities and seminaries and push this egalitarian stuff for the masses, while they were able to start working on their breakaway society kind of thing. So you could kind of see how there's kind of two prongs to it, like kind of a different set of morality for the elites versus the common folk out there in the world, and how we're all being mixed into this gray global stew. And I know a lot of people have a hard time saying that quote unquote conspiracies could be propagated over multiple generations, but it does seem to have been going in the same direction for quite some time. If you look back to science fiction authors of the early 1900s, through what people involved in this themselves are saying, like the Carroll Quigley book, Tragedy and Hope, to things like Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, which to him was not just a science fiction book. I remember reading it in 8th and 9th grade, but they were kind of just he was laying out the kind of world he wants. Aldous Huxley was involved in this kind of thing. So that's a whole other topic and beast in and of itself. But again, in the spirit of today's show and having you on, we are trying to get at least kind of throw up all of these different data points so that people listening could go have their own conversations, do their own research, but maybe it'll start some people off on areas of research they realize they need to look at a little more, as we're all trying to get this mosaic, right? Like have this picture come into focus as to how we arrived at the place that we find ourselves in, as we're all trying to do. I want to shift now to talking a little about power. You mentioned that before. And I want to talk about, you have this quote that no power lets you consciously undermine it. You were talking about free speech. Liberalist figures like Sargon, who might call themselves something like free speech absolutists, and how many on the right, especially right now, because they are not in power, are going to be saying, well, we're all about free speech and the left is suppressing us. But you make an argument where you have to have an understanding of soft power, how the actual machinations of power work. They're masked by the current order. A lot of people fall for this ruse. But you actually come down pretty hard in your series about not having this absolute free speech, not having this absolute open forum, air out all ideas kind of things, that a lot of our ideas have been ruthlessly suppressed. And as you point out, unlike the Milos of the world, it's actually not at all accurate to say that, well, bad ideas will die if you let them air out. No, we actually, as we said before, we do have a lot of facts and data on our side, and they are hidden from the vast, vast majority of the public. And it's absolutely crippling what we're trying to do. So if you could please paint a picture of your whole perspective on that.
Well, yeah, one theme that I talk about a lot is power, because I do think that ultimately you need power if you're going to actually, if you're actually going to survive, and you need or you need power to be loyal to you. In terms of because I made a video on the marketplace of ideas, there's this concept that a lot of people will talk about. It originated with John Stuart Mill, that we just need to have free and open discourse where everyone can air their opinion. The best opinions will rise to the top, and people will scientifically decide what is the best viewpoint, and and people will be convinced by that, and that's what they'll vote for, and that's what will be implemented. And it just doesn't work like that. The problem with the marketplace of ideas, there's two problems with it. First one is that people don't make decisions based on that. People are controlled. People are irrational. They're controlled by religious-like thinking. They're not controlled by rational thinking. So, you can say it doesn't matter what facts you show to a leftist. If they think that you are a quote unquote racist, they hate your guts, and they think that you're the worst person ever to live. And there's basically no conversation to be had after that. But secondly, those in power will be able to push through their ideas, regardless really of how popular they are, or if they're based on truth or not. Because like we mentioned earlier with HBD, we have so much evidence for that, yet it's an idea that's just been relentlessly suppressed for decades and decades, and successfully so. Like, we've had this research for 30, 40 years or so, and that was actually conventional scientific knowledge prior to World War II. But all the policies being created in the Western world today are based on 0% heritable human traits. Really, they're based on absolute egalitarianism. Even though if there was actually any debate, that idea would just be patently ridiculous. And they just have these mechanisms in place that they're able to essentially crush any ideas they don't want. And this really speaks to who's really in power. Where does power really come from? It comes from things like the media, the education system, corporations, woke capital. That's the big one today. And then also the government. But then there's so many unelected aspects of that. There's the courts, and ultimately the idea that you can just gain power by voting someone in. It just doesn't work like that. Like, an example could be this: Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. I mean, he was supposed to be against mass immigration. He was supposed to be against all this crazy anti-white ideology going on. But this stuff is more hegemonic than it was before Donald Trump was elected. So if the American people actually were being ruled by their own consent, this stuff should be all gone. They voted for Donald Trump, but it's more powerful now than it ever was. So right. Clearly, having the president in the White House. Now, look, I'm aware Trump is not our guy, but clearly there's just so many other aspects. We're governed by so many other forces, most of which are unelected. Like we can't vote. I don't know, these anti-whites in CNN. We can't vote. What's his name? Van Jones or Don Lemon out of CNN. We can't vote Robin DiAngelo out of the university systems. But these people have just so much control over the discourse and over policy that we just have no say in it. And Jason has talked a lot before about how ruthless they actually are at weeding out anyone that dares speak up for white well-being in politics, in these political parties.
Yes, since you mentioned woke capital, why don't you just continue on to that, how it has this symbiotic relationship with this anti-white ideology today called progressivism, how the two play off of each other. A lot of people, to the layman, they don't really get it. They're like, why are these corporations pushing all this social justice stuff all of a sudden? So how would you, well, you know, a lot of our chat's already familiar with this, so let me put it to you this way. What would be a good, concise explanation you would give to a friend or family member of yours that asked you a question like that in good faith?
So why are these corporations all promoting this crazy ideology?
Right.
So what I'd say is that, and this is kind of the answer to the why. So we all know that we're living under an anti-white paradigm, but then there's the question is why? Why does this exist? And I think that one of the explanations is that they really want a better consumer class. They want a class of people who are completely deracinated from any kind of identity, spirituality, one who's more complacent, works for lower wages, and is really just a lot easier to control than we are. And also is one that is not, and one that doesn't really have potential to actually threaten the power of the elites. And, you know, white cohesion and white nations do have that power. But, you know, if they replace them with this underclass from the third world, I mean, they make for a lot better consumers. So, you know, let's just take, you know, your typical middle class white American nuclear family. You know, they have a lot of things. You know, they might be Christians, they might be religious, they might have a nice community, they might be thinking about, you know, their children's future, and they just have all these things. Maybe they're proud of their country, they're maybe very patriotic. They have all these things that give their life meaning and that motivate them, that are immaterial and that matter to them more than money. But then, you know, compare that to an urbanite, maybe from some kind of migrant background. Maybe they're LGBT or something like that. So they're never going to have a family. They don't really have any real community. They work for lower wages, and they're really just satisfied by having, you know, the next Marvel movie where, you know, what's his name? I don't know, Hulk and Thor punch each other a bunch, and there's a beam in the sky, and that's basically all they want for. That's basically all they want for their life. They're the ideal consumer because their entire being is focused around just buying these products. They and just look at all these like fandoms. You'll have the Marvel fandom, the Star Wars fandom. This stuff replaces identity, and essentially, my theory behind woke capital is that it's an ideology designed to craft a better consumer. So they're crafting this lower class, and Morgoth did a great video on Machiavelli today, which he talked about this very phenomenon. It's essentially the small amount of elites and the big underclass trying to pinch out the middle that being us, so that you have this society in the future where it's going to be, if they succeed, which they won't, but of a small amount of elites with huge amount of wealth and a very poor low IQ servant class who just buys products for all time.
Would you say that a lot of what this is, to try to sum it up in a pithy statement, is that we're living in, it's kind of like the circling of the drain, that these different, because I was mentioning before, quote unquote, conspiracy theories and how a lot of people feel It's hard. It's impossible to imagine something being carried out intergenerationally. But certainly there are people with agendas and power, and they do pass on a certain ethos from one generation to the next. But more broadly than that, that it is a convergence, a different kind of convergence of catastrophes. I know that's the name of a book, but I used that in a tweet earlier today when I was promoting this show, where it's kind of an ideological or social convergence of catastrophes, where there have been a few different agendas perhaps set in motion by different people with different aims within recent history. And that now, while there's still certainly, I'm not saying there's a monolith, there's still certainly, I'm sure, competing factions, and there's vying for power behind the scenes and all that kind of thing. But the social dynamics that have been set in play by these different agendas are all kind of feeding off of one another at this point, and it's reaching a fever pitch. So as I said, when I was mentioning things like Aldous Huxley and Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope and things like that, there's a push for like a technocratic elite kind of thing and this vision there. But then, as we all well know, there are more particular groups who have a specific and deliberate and conscious animus against white people. So some, like the first group I mentioned, they might just want to see a global plantation of this weird consumerist proletariat, and they're not really even thinking in terms of racial terms. But there are certainly others who have a strong sense of who they are and certain interpretation of history and what their role in it is, and again have a deliberate and conscious animus against whites. And then a third leg of this tripod of evil would be something I was mentioning before, which is again important, especially on a show like this, for us to explore, because we have to do things by us and for us and about us, right, to understand ourselves better. And that is where our weaknesses are. And that's where I take it back to where we began with the Enlightenment, how sure, they could not have imagined the interconnected world that we live in today. And maybe when some of them said, quote unquote, man, yeah, they maybe to greater degrees or lesser degrees, they possibly acknowledged that they were really only talking about European man. I don't know. Some of them probably did think in terms of general man. But that these egalitarian strains, these empathetic strains, the kind of thing that Kevin McDonald talks about in his more recent work when he's talking about us now. Of course, that's what his more recent books are turning to, understanding who we are, that all of these things have kind of melded into this soup. And that's what we're living in now. And that's why I use that metaphor of like the drain is circling, where it's getting closer and closer to this point where everything's becoming, it's focused to this 1-0 point, and we're getting to that. And that's why things seem to be ramping up, because there's all these different elements that have been moving on their own trajectory, and now they're becoming more and more symbiotic.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that assessment, that there is the materialistic aspect, that you just want. There's the elites that want the underclass. There's our own kind of spiritual malaise that we are in, and then the other thing that I was thinking about this last year. It's like that a lot of the things that we see today, a lot of them were started by people that are long dead. A lot of them started, one thing you'll often hear Laura Towler over in the UK talk about is the Empire Windrush arriving in Britain in 1948. And I thought, if they started all this stuff back then, I mean, if they were just trying to create that future where they're going to be very rich, well, they'd be dead by then. So they had to have some kind of idea of posterity and of something immaterial that they were pursuing, some kind of group interests. So I definitely think that's an element of it. So I would say that there is that there's kind of this trifecta of those three things you just mentioned. And I guess what I'm trying to do with the Enlightenment videos is breaking us out of that, breaking us out of a kind of a political ideology that just prevents us from actually addressing the situation that we're in.
Right, and maybe that this is a good angle to take as we get into the latter portion of the show, before Jason gives us some of the comments and the questions from the chat who have been listening tonight. And that would be, of course, ways that we can move forward. You put a lot of emphasis on culture, and you borrow a phrase from Marx about superstructure being even perhaps more important than the foundation, more important than economy, is the arts, the cultures, the culture, the ideas that people go on, and just the underlying assumptions. Like you were saying a few moments ago, we can't vote out certain media figures, or we can't just vote away, at least in the immediate term, the influence of all kinds of Hollywood movies and pop culture. It's kind of just the water we're swimming around in, like water to a fish. That's why the work we do here, that Jason does, that I do, and a lot of people were associated with, it dovetails perfectly what your ethos is with what we're trying to do. And so we're trying to give our people back to themselves first. That's kind of the ground that we work on. But any ideas about how to prepare people? What are your takes on how to prepare people, our people, so that their minds and their hearts are more receptive and able to receive these healthier messages and shift their views to prepare them for a better tomorrow?
Well, one thing that Devin Stack of Blackpilled said to me when we spoke to each other was that he believes that for us to be successful, our ideas need to take on a form of religiosity the same way that the left's ideas have. So, we can't, I don't think that people are necessarily motivated just by facts and statistics as much as they are of some kind of something that they see as divine, really. I myself am religious. I myself am a Christian, but I understand many in our sphere are not. But I do think that, we can all unite under this under a appreciation for our civilization and our people and the great culture that we've created. And I think that that's going to be the real driving factor to get people on our side and to actually fight to preserve that. I had mentioned in one of my videos that, I've made a lot of videos about things like a lot of them is argumentation. The Enlightenment videos are argumentation, but it wasn't actually really argumentation that won me over to this sphere of politics. I think that it was really cultural, really. It was kind of a longing for a more meaningful life. I made a video about these two films that I saw when I was 17 years old. It's the two American Civil War epics, Gettysburg and Gods and Generals. And I'd say that was probably a turning point for me because, I kind of was disillusioned with the meaninglessness of modern life. And these films, I found that they were the first things that really introduced me to things like the idea of homeland and the idea of peoplehood and things like honor and hierarchy and masculinity. And there's just all these amazing themes in these films that inspired me when I was a young man. And, they aren't even very political at all. They aren't political propaganda by any stretch of the imagination. But I do feel that culture and art really has the power to do that. And I think for a lot of people, we're living in this this nihilistic era. They really want something to they really want something to fight for that's actually meaningful. And unfortunately, right now, what they're being given is anti-whiteism. They're being given things like Black Lives Matter as their cause. And I think that if we're actually going to be successful, we need to offer them something as an alternative that's more healthy.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that kind of subtle red pill. It's something we've spoken about before, how you can just show someone, give them a sense of something that's healthier. Like you were saying, those films weren't overtly political, but watched your videos on those films, definitely recommend them as well. And how it was just a signal, right? Was that your experience of it? It's just like,
yeah, it was just
subconscious.
a signal, like, introducing me to just a different kind of conception of life that's just outside of the modern materialistic one that we're in.
Yeah, and we could certainly make our own art right now, and we are, of course. But as hopeless as it might seem, it could just take one or two pieces of art to make the rounds that would really wake a lot of people up, because it kind of like memes on the internet, but a more concentrated form of that. It would have that package of ideas and energies in whatever it is, film or a song or something like that, that it would be so antithetical, and just it would feel so much different when you ingest it. Because just like food you eat, there's a psychic ingestion of art. It would feel so different when you ingest it versus what is forced down our throats, especially these last couple of decades, that for all of the marketing power and all of the money we don't have as compared to Netflix and Hollywood and all that, I know it might sound a little optimistic, but I really do think that we could very well see within the next couple of years and we're already grooming a lot of artists. Again, something Jason and I are very, very involved in, very passionate about, but coming out of our spheres, keep swinging for the fences, guys, because something's going to crack and make the rounds, and not only affect people in our spheres, but people not even directly in our spheres right now, that could instantly wake people up and kind of be this Gordian knot cutting moment.
Yeah, and there's a huge opportunity because people just hate this garbage that's coming out today. You can go on YouTube and you can find hundreds of hours worth of these nerd videos where these guys are complaining about Star Wars and about I don't know, Battlefield or The Last of Us or some video game or some modern film that pushes an anti-white agenda. They're just dying for something that actually appeals to them. And there's just this huge opportunity for us because, hopefully eventually we'll be able to move them away from that kind of culture and towards something that is a lot more healthy. And not only do we have a lot of people creating great art, there's just so much out there that already exists. I haven't paid for a single piece of entertainment for the last 2 or 3 years, with the exception of maybe one or two films that I've seen in the movie theater. You can get all this stuff for free. There's all this, you have the entire history of Western literature. You have all these amazing films that were made, before Hollywood got into its current ideological state, even though I am aware that it was never I'm aware Hollywood was never under our control, but there was still some good work that came out of it from our people. And there's just all this great art out there that's already available to us. And I think we have to use it. That's why I really enjoy looking at certain films and certain books and just pieces of our culture on my channel, and dissecting them and looking at the themes and what they suggest about the world, because I find that for a lot of people that is actually a lot more powerful than argumentation.
Absolutely is something we speak about a lot here. And having said that, I can't believe that it's already been an hour and 15 minutes. It seems like a lot shorter. The time's been flying. I've been enjoying this. But Jason, what is going on? And anyone out there in TV land, our good TV land,
yes,
with some questions or comments for our guest Endeavour here.
Well, it is truly amazing how quickly the time has gone by with Endeavour. We absolutely are going to have you back, brother, for a part 2. Because I feel like it won't be a revisit. I feel like we're not really covering everything that I would like to cover with you today. So we'll have to have you back for part 2 as soon as we possibly can. And if you all do have any questions or comments for Endeavour, Jared, or myself, tag me as No White Guilt on the No White Guilt channel, Discipline with NWG on that channel, or on the Talk Heaven question widget over on Entropy. And when you place a question or comment there, it does not disappear unless you delete it or I delete it. You can financially gift there as well with any questions or comments. And the same can be done over on Cash App, which appears to be working. We do have we have one financial gift from the great DB Cooper, participant in the White Positive Sphere for quite a long time now. A big Promethean hails to you, brother. Financially gifting $5 and asking me specifically if I practice any martial art. I'll throw that out to everybody as well. I'll just say that if I do or did, I'm not going to own up to it, because you end up in a fight with an anti-white, and then they'll say, this is a trained fighter, and so they're going to tack on another 25 years to your sentence. But have either of you, or do you want to take the same tack that I have taken with regard to martial arts or any fight training?
I think I'll take the same tact.
I will triple that.
All right. Very good. We have another financial gift that just came in from the aforementioned Tall Kevin, a great participant in our community, financially gifting $7. What about culture art makes it too high class for most? Why do people instantly turn away when you mention going to a play, opera, museums, historical sites? Yet so many gravitate to anti-white filth. That's a fabulous question, Kevin, and I will pass that right over to our esteemed guest.
I don't know. I guess I don't know if that is always true for me. I mean, many people I know enjoy historical sites, plays, art galleries, things like that. But I think maybe one of the reasons for that is that anti-white trash is it's cheap. Really, it's kind of the lowest common denominator. It's a lot easier to just binge watch some trash sitcom on Netflix, which just forces all these degenerate themes for 8 hours in your evening, than it is to actually enjoy something meaningful. So for a lot of people, it's kind of the same reason why do people eat chocolate bars and potato chips instead of eating vegetables and red meats and stuff like that, and the food that's good for you. It's because it's kind of just easier, maybe, for them. I don't know though, because I do know a lot of people that might not apply for them.
Mr. George, do you have a response for that question?
Well, very briefly, one of the tacks we can take with that is simply social signaling. Unfortunately, of course, especially for young people who are closer to that biological impetus to fit in, because our brains are wired for that, connected to survival. It's connected to survival instincts, that many of our young people are given these social signals to fit in, to be accepted, which is right next to the part of your brain that says, I'm going to survive because I'm part of the group. Well, it's certainly not the kind of high art that was mentioned in the question. It's the anti-white filth that was mentioned in the question. So this is why, as a secondary byproduct of what we're doing here, creating community, what we're doing is we're creating a space where other people can find that their wholesome tastes, or at least wanting to explore such things and find if they even exist, will not be mocked, that they'll be accepted, that they have a place. That's why community is important. But yeah, in the wider world, it's largely about social signals. It doesn't have to be that way. There's always going to be a variety of people with a variety of tastes. As we said earlier in the show, I think all of us here believe to some degree in social hierarchy and order and typology. There's different types of people. It's not to say that there's rigid categories, but there's still different tastes, different psychographics, different talents, different types of intelligence. But that doesn't mean that there aren't art forms that can't be enjoyed by all. I know one quick example is there was a time in Italy when many of the peasant class were still conversant in opera because it was considered a national treasure of the Italian people, their particular works, of their particular composers. So that's just one example to keep in mind. That's the kind of thing that will be hidden from us in most of our schools today. But that's exactly the kind of that's a precise kind of little piece of datum, singular, that is missing from our education that we do well to remember.
Yeah, very well. Endeavour, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Uh, no, I think maybe it's just because it's not promoted as much. The media has just huge control over people, and a lot of people just have never even heard of a lot of maybe good works of high art, and just the common filth is what they end up getting.
Yeah, precisely. I agree with everything that both of you just said on that. There are many ways, I guess, to dissect exactly what's taking place there, but it clearly is everything that you both said, and interpretations of both of those, of everything you both just said. When the human animal can take pleasure in a great many things, and it can be as base as a wild animal, or it could be as heroic and ennobled as the spirit of Western kind can make it. And the question is, what kind of society are you going to have, and what kind of society do you want? Does those who are leading the society want you to have? So it's a fantastic question, but thank you very much for that. And we just had Squirrels came in with a question as a financial gift. We do have a Volkish Warrior asking on the question widget, saying that he wishes that I had more weight in the white positive sphere instead of some bad actors who are saying that we're the problem if we vote for Trump. Well, of course, that's that anybody saying something like that is either just after a novelty take, or they feel confident that Trump is going to win anyhow, or they are absolute traitors to Western kind and Western civilization. We have Mark here, and what I want to do is in the closing minutes, I want to give our guest an opportunity to speak to briefly to a subject while we see if anybody else has any other questions or comments. Mark Davis, participant in our community, great to see you. He's in the chat today, and he said that, let me see, he was made aware by a Facebook group. Now, we don't know, this is something that's being claimed on a Facebook group, but it could indeed be the case. If anybody has any confirming information, let us know, that Canon Hennant's family had to postpone his vigil because of the threats made by an anti-white group or groups. And he asks, Mark does, to please make the community aware of this. Of course, Canon Hennant was the little white child, 5 years old, who had accidentally ridden his bicycle on a portion of the front yard of a anti-white's home. And the anti-white came outside, and in front of Canon's two sisters, I think they are also in single digits, blew his head off. And the establishment media is saying nothing, of course, about this. What I want to do is I want to give you, brother, an opportunity to speak to this act and the establishment, the anti-white establishment, the anti-white regime's ignoring of this act, as your opinion is informed by the research and study that you are engaged in. And then we will wrap up with the final financial gifts and any final questions we have. I turn it over to you, Endeavour.
Oh, the Canon Hennant case, that was awful. You know, I try my hardest not to get angry about the news anymore, because, you know, you just can't live being outraged by every story that comes out in the cycle. But that was one that, in particular, that one really set me off the other day, and it's just unbelievable. And not only the fact that this happened, but that the entire establishment media was silent on it. I made a meme where I compared an article from the Independent, a newspaper in the UK, that they were reporting that a white man had erased a non-white girl's chalk drawing on the sidewalk, and how he was this horrible bigot because of that. But, you know, a young white boy having his life stolen from him in a brutal, horrific manner right in front of his family. That's only makes the local news. But what I will say, though, is that I think that as you know, I take no joy out of this tragedy, but I do think that we as a community did bind together well in this case, because this was only reported locally when this happened about 4 or 5 days ago. But it's forced the international media. We've forced the international media to take it on board because people started to share the story. It got out onto social media. The GoFundMe, his family was only asking for $5,000 for his funeral, and they've raised now over $200,000. And it's my hope that they can give their surviving children the best life possible with that money. I donated myself. And I think just sharing that story and revealing not only how horrific the details of this case were, but how the mainstream media was completely silent, that really forced their hand. And today it was on CNN. So of course they just say a man murdered a boy. They don't say the race, but the story reached a much bigger audience. And I think a lot of that is our community binding together and, getting the word out, being the first ones to share it on social media, and then it gets picked up. So, on a horrible situation, but I do think that it is encouraging that, we can bind together and help our people when they need it.
Very well said, good sir. It's been a fantastic evening together, and it's marvelous to have so many wonderful people in the advanced placement of the white positive sphere coming together to make change, to take all of the ideas, the concepts, and the things that work that we have put through the scientific method, and we now apply here to make a difference in our lives. That's what's important. That's where the difference is being made, not just doom documenting or doom dissecting, but actually recapturing our destiny. And what we'll do, Endeavour, is we will go out on this final question, financial gift from Squirrels with 10 Canadian dollars. And on that question, we will have you give us where folks can find you and what you're working on and what you will be working on in the near future. And that question is, my husband showed me Endeavour's content a few months back, and I've been watching every video since. We are trying to create local community here in Southern Ontario. Is that something Endeavour is interested in? If yes, how can we contact him? Love you guys. Well, Squirrels, he's about to tell you how to contact him and what he's doing next, and I pass it on over to our esteemed guest, Endeavour.
Yes. So you can contact me either you can send me a DM on Twitter, or you can contact me on Telegram. I will post my Telegram account where people can message me personally. I can do that. I am from Southern Ontario, but I have actually moved out, but I will be back there intermittently. I have moved around in the last 2 years or so. I've spent time in Europe and in other parts of the country of Canada. But I am definitely interested in community organizing. I think we really gotta get on that. Yes, you just send me a message, and next time I'm in the area, I would be more than happy to maybe try to get some kind of local meetings together. So some of our guys in the area can meet each other and start forming the communities that we really need. And hopefully in the future, we can start real political action in Canada. It's a much smaller scene there, but I think we can piggyback off of a lot of the great work that people are doing in the United States and in Europe. And, we have a lot of great figures. I think like Ricardo Duchesne, he's made some great content. He's written several great books. Robin Riley, she's making excellent content for mothers and for families out in the west of the country. Yes, you can message me. My DMs are open. I answer all of them as long as it's not someone who's just trying to waste my time. I answer all DMs. So you can find me on YouTube at the YouTube channel Endeavour. I'm still there for now, but if I get taken down, my main channel will be on my BitChute, where I post exclusive content there too. And I usually use Twitter and Telegram is where you can follow my work and you can contact me. So that's how you can find my work. And I just wanted to say thank you to Jason and Jared for the invitation. It's been a pleasure, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
We absolutely will. We're going to have you back for a part 2. This has been a very interesting conversation, engrossing from start to finish. Mr. George, where can folks find you? What are your final thoughts?
Well, Endeavour, yeah, I have to say, hearing that you have spent some time in other Western nations, that'll certainly be something I'd like to talk about next time. I always like to hear about the similarities and differences that one feels amongst our people, and that interesting topic of the things, the overarching things that connect us, and then the more specific expressions in our ethnicities in our different countries. I always love to hear perspectives on that and a lot more. So, as you all know, you can find me at thegreatorder.com. It's a catalog for all the things I do. And I have a bit of an announcement. I'm actually going to be doing a stream with our friend John Bruce Leonard, editor-in-chief of Arctos Publishing, this Monday, August 17th at noon on my channel. And that is 5 in the UK that day, 6 Central Europe. But John and I have been speaking a little more behind the scenes, and we had so many things to talk about and so many things to ask each other that we decided to start doing some streams, and we'll see what comes of it. But essentially, the frame of it is kind of learning in public, and we're going to be looking at the paradigm shifts that are going on in the wider world and casting our gaze outward so that we can all kind of navigate the dichotomies out there together and better understand them so we don't fall into confusion of our times. And as the ethos suggests of kind of learning in public, I think you guys know, if you know me at all, that, I try to get up here and have something to put forth. But at the same time, I don't claim to be an expert on anything. I think it's important for content creators to say things like, I don't know, when they really don't know the answer to a question, or to ask questions and maintain, well, I essentially see what I'm saying is to maintain a mixture of focus and humility. So John and I, again, from our private conversations, felt that maybe we had a different kind of an angle to give that way, and something that can kind of complement some of the other things I do. So we're going to do some streams and kind of see where it goes. But the first one will be on this Monday at noon, as we get to air some of these questions together. And as we're all trying to do, come to some more health and meaning and virtue to in this world we live in today. So that'll be Monday at noon on my channel. And other than that, there's more rolling out. As I've been mentioning, music and all kinds of things have been worked on. I know I've been a little quiet this summer, but things are going on, and they will be announced as they roll out. There's a book project that'll be rolling out soon as well that we'll be talking more about. So please do stay tuned. Of course, the shared site for this stream you're listening to now, the after party, the media that Jason and I do together, the community growing around this, that is at theafterparty.tv. And speaking of which, Jason, what is going on in about half an hour from now?
Yes, 24 and a half minutes from now, we have the Garage Party. You'll be able to find it on all the platforms that you are on right now. It is going to be a premiere, but also live streamed. And it's about 45 minutes of nothing but music and fun for everybody to hang out on a Friday night and turn their speakers all the way up and melt them down. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight and with us, for posting comments, or just standing against the wall like a wallflower. And we say hello as well to everybody who will be watching in replay this wonderful show that we had today. Please share the work that we are doing here with your friends, family, and any strangers you get an opportunity to share with, because this will be what will make the difference, make or break it for us in the end. Dissecting and documenting all that is horrible in the world is not going to be enough, ladies and gentlemen. We have to go free. Let me thank the moderators that were here today with us. I saw Roy and I saw Bartleby, both magnificent heroes. Thank you to both of you for the work that you are doing for White Wellbeing. I will spotlight some folks I saw in the live chat today. I saw SOX Rebellion was with us. Esgrim was also here. So was Bodacious. Great name. Silver Fox Dude 7 was also here, as well as the Milkman. And Think on Meanie Caldwell was also here. Big spotlight and salute to all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you to everyone who financially gifted and posted questions and comments for the panel. And we look forward to seeing every single one of you